Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about breaking down grass lakes so that you will increase the number of bites that you get. You will be so much more efficient on the water and take a lake that can sometimes be extremely intimidating and break it down fast so that you're catching more bass on the water. This is something that I get a lot of questions on. Fishing grass is one of my favorite things to do. And it's because once you understand the high percentage places where you should be fishing and how efficiently you can take hundreds of acres of grass and break it down into a very simple, fast way to locate where the fish are at, you just become a much better angler and you become much more productive on the water. So I want to provide you with the locations that I look for that next time you're out on the water, you can quickly identify, you can quickly figure out whether the fish are utilizing them and just become a more efficient angler. These are things I've done to win a lot of money over my career, and they work from down in Florida all the way up to up north where I live. It doesn't matter. If you have a grass lake, these are the types of things that you're going to be looking for next time you're out.
Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This has had an amazing new update. As you guys know, I love the water clarity feature. As you can see right here, we're looking at Grand Lake, which just had a whole pile of rain come into it. It went from being really clear to having a lot of dirty water coming in the bottom end of it. Just an amazing feature to be able to determine where the clear water is versus the muddy water. However, they just introduced the wind effects. Now, the wind effects is really cool because we've had wind effects as part of the app in the past, but all it did is show where the wind was hitting the shoreline the most, as you can see from the dots, the orange and bright red dots, which indicate where the wind is really striking. But now the wind feature also indicates what the wave action is like on the lake itself. So some of the features you're going to get from this is determining where to get from place to place safely by avoiding the heavy, rough water conditions. You'll be able to determine where you may have some of the strongest current flow and some of the places where you can fish to stay protected. Now, along with that, you still have some of my favorite features like the patterns that you've got on the lake that indicate the best baits and lures to fish with. You've also got the water inflow app, which shows you where a bunch of the rain input comes in. That can be an amazing pattern to fish throughout the year. Just a great feature to have. So many positive features anytime you're fishing or using the Deep Dive app. Just points you in the right direction to catch more fish. Whether you're a tournament angler or a local fun fisherman that's just out to catch a few fish, the Deep Dive app will help you catch more fish next time you're out on the water.
One of the most intimidating things anytime you're fishing a lake that has got a ton of grass in it is figuring out where those fish are going to be located. You know, when you pull up to a section of the lake and you look out and you see grass scattered everywhere, that can be intimidating. What you're going to be looking for are those high percentage spots. So the first thing I'm always doing is trying to identify the depth at which that grass that I'm targeting grows out to. Every grass has a shallow side and a deep side. So like for milfoil up in my neck of the woods, generally you're looking at 3 feet to 8 feet. Generally, that's kind of the main zone that milfoil grows. Hydrilla is a little different, pondweed's a little different, cabbage, whatever the grass is, they generally have zones that they like to grow in terms of depth, and they've got bottom composition that they like to grow in. You know, some prefer more of a mucky bottom, some like a harder bottom. It's just one of those things. Every plant has its own needs in terms of what it's looking for. If you can identify what depth the grass is growing to, so let's say we're concentrating on milfoil and we know it's growing to 8 feet deep. One of the first things I'm going to do is try to identify points on my contour line map that might allow there to be a defined point within the grass. So I'm going to look at my map. I'm going to say, hey, here's a point, you know, in 8 feet of water. So maybe it's a big flat, but there's a little point on that flat that you really wouldn't look at fishing generally just based on the contour line change. Well, I might see that completely differently if I'm fishing a grass lake because that little flat point might actually create a point in the grass. And I love to fish grass points. I think it's one of those things that the fish utilize very much like a contour line point meaning, an actual point on the bottom, but that point in the grass, the fish are going to use the same way. It's a high percentage feeding location. They're going to use that grass to actually try to push bait fish into. They're going to use it to try to identify current. They're going to use it as an ambush feeding location. So you're really looking for points in the grass, and knowing what depth the grass grows to is a great way to identify where the points are more likely going to be around that lake. So I'm always looking for that. Another thing that I'm always looking for are holes within the grass. Those holes can be created based on bottom composition changes. So, like I said, some plants like to grow in a softer bottom, and there might be a hard bottom area within that grass flat, and that prevents the grass from growing. It could be a contour line change. So maybe you've got a 10-foot flat that's full of grass, but there's a 15-foot hole. It could be you've got something laying on the bottom. So maybe you've got a boat, a sunken boat laying on a grass flat, and the grass can't grow where that boat's at. The point is, I'm always looking for holes in the grass, and that's because the bass love to use those holes as feeding locations. Generally speaking, they'd rather sit in the grass and wait for something to swim through that hole so they can ambush it than trying to chase bait in the grass flat itself, because it's easier for the bait to get by. But if they can ambush anything that comes through that hole, their success percentage of feeding goes up dramatically. So I'm always looking for holes in the grass. That is a absolute key to finding areas where the fish are living, especially if you're talking about having a grass flat that's like 100 yards long by 100 yards wide, and it's just solid thick grass. The fish generally aren't going to be actively feeding in that grass. That doesn't mean they're not in it. It's just not where you're going to find it's not a high percentage area because it's not efficient for you to fish a really thick clump of grass like that. So the second thing is holes. The third thing I'm looking for are inside and outside weed lines. So like I said, grass generally has a shallow depth that it'll grow to and a deep depth that it'll grow to. So in the case of milfoil in my neck of the woods, if the inside weed line is 3 feet, that's about as shallow as the milfoil wants to grow. You can have a very defined inside edge, just like the outside edge, where you have maybe the grass growing to 8 feet and then it just abruptly stops. So I'm looking for that abrupt weed line edge. I'm not a huge fan of trying to fish a weed line where the grass tapers out over a large area. It's just a lot harder to be efficient on that. And a lot of times I feel like those fish prefer the abrupt weed line edge because that gives them more ability to push bait fish into that thick edge versus trying to chase them through a scattered area of grass. But that inside weed line can be absolutely as good as the outside weed line, especially if you're talking about springtime or low light conditions. That's best time I feel like that inside weed line is great. The outside weed line is generally one of the best things you can do during the warmest part of the year, during your summer months. So those fish will definitely utilize different weed lines, but your weed lines are going to be so critical in allowing the fish to feed. A lot of times your weed lines are travel routes, and those weed lines aren't necessarily just a contour line change. Some of the best weed lines I can think of have some man-made structure. Like, sometimes you'll have an old roadbed that cuts through a flat and the grass doesn't grow on the old roadbeds, but that roadbed acts as a weed line. It could be a creek channel that wanders through a flat. Things like that can be absolutely dynamite anytime you're fishing grass, but your inside and outside weed lines are dynamite. Another thing that I look for is a rock mixture with the grass. I don't know if I've ever fished a lake anywhere in the country that if I can find rock mixed with grass, I haven't been productive. It's generally not as easy as you think to find because a lot of times if you do have rock, the rock is so thick that the grass can't grow in the rock at all. And if you don't have rock, sometimes the grass is so thick that you don't have any rock to be able to grow in. The key is finding a mixture where you have scattered rock that allows there to be some grass growth, but then you have rock mixed in, which means you have holes in the grass. If you can identify those areas, they can be amazing areas to fish for all species of bass, for all species, honestly. That's Some of the keys to find for walleye too is a good rock mixture with some grass. But generally speaking, I feel like those create really good ecosystems where you have a lot of bait fish, you have crayfish, you have just a lot of things going on. You have a lot of ambush locations, you have a lot of open areas for the fish to feed, and just some of the best stuff you can find. And it works everywhere. If you find it down south in Florida, maybe your rock isn't actual boulder rock like you'd have maybe up here in the North Country, but it could be more along the lines of shell beds. Those shell beds generally will keep areas free of grass. So you want to find those hard bottom areas mixed in with grass. If you can do that, dynamite, just absolutely dynamite areas to fish. The last thing I want to point out is if you have topped out grass, some of your best areas to fish will be any place you have topped out grass because it provides shade, it provides ambush locations, and more importantly, the best thing it does is it provides current breaks. And I'm not necessarily talking about natural current coming down the lake. Obviously, if you have natural current flow based on water coming into your fishery, that's great. But you can have current flow from wind as much as you can have natural current of the river coming in. In fact, most lakes that have grass generally have more wind driven current than natural current. But the key here is your matted vegetation will create current breaks. It'll funnel current in certain directions. It'll just create high percentage areas. So if you've got, a bunch of clumped mats, like down in Florida, where sometimes you have hyacinth on top, those are high percentage areas. Maybe you've got, a nice weed line that's got, and the reason I look more for topped out stuff is that topped out stuff will funnel the current even more. If you've got submerged grass, it'll still funnel current. It doesn't funnel it nearly as well because some of that wind will push water up over the grass versus your topped out grass, which will really funnel that water flow in certain directions. But if you can find it with points, if you can find it where maybe you've got a saddle, so you've got, water that's pushing between a point and a clump of grass that's off that point, and it's just funneling it through, those can be such good locations to fish. Obviously, you can have too much wind. If you have too much wind, you can get to the point where it blows over the topped out matted vegetation and knocks it down. That's not necessarily the ideal. But if you can find current being funneled by grass clumps, that is such a high percentage area. But I'm telling you, if you take these spots, you go to your local grass lake, pull up some aerial maps, pull up your contour maps, you can find so many of these spots either before you even get to the lake or even being on the water, just visually seeing them. You can take huge grass mats, knock them down into your high percentage areas. And one of the keys with grass is generally if you get one bite, there's more fish there. And you can quickly determine parts of the lakes that seem like they have just better groups of fish. Uh, it's really, I love fishing grass. I think it's a very simple approach that you can quickly break down these big areas that seem to really intimidate a lot of anglers, but it doesn't need to. So if you use these tips, you should be able to catch more fish. Hopefully this helps you. If you think it does and you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'm telling you guys, grass is not intimidating. Use it to your advantage to go out and catch more fish and do it efficiently. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good day.